Hi, everyone. Welcome. As you're coming in here, I need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping before we get started. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. So we're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation, a really great one today on debt. Attendees are muted, but we encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenter will answer those questions during or after the webinar today during our question and answer period. If you ask a question in the chat box and we don't have a chance to get to that, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. We'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to today's guest. We've had him several times. JR is a certified financial planning practitioner that utilizes a unique approach and methodology called financial life planning. Life planning connects the dots between financial realities and the lives we long to live. This method is based on the premise that advisors should first discover a client's most essential goals in life before formulating a financial plan. So a client's finances fully support those goals. As a lifelong learner, musician, and athlete, JR holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, trains Muay Thai, and has been playing the guitar for over 30 years. He actively performs and writes music in his band. And JR, you're always an interesting presenter, so we're really excited to have you. And I'll take you to the first slide. Here we go.
I love that you say that. I'm an interesting presenter. Because
interesting in a good way.
Yeah, well, in the world of cancel culture, with this presentation, I'm probably going to get canceled. So, because I believe there are different opinions on debt, and the mainstream opinion on debt sometimes works out really well, and sometimes it doesn't. And so, what the basic, see, and it says it right there, different viewpoints about debt. Yes, one of the viewpoints that you would probably get off of a Google search is pay off all your debts as fast as possible. And there's some power to that, right? When we pay off our debts as fast as possible, they emotionally disappear. And so we're in this mindset, a healthier mindset. Love that. It gets rid of the negative aspect of debt, which is you paying some other institution, interest. And so that's some really good things there. But do you know that if you pay off debts too fast, it can hinder your wealth building? And so wealth building is a different conversation. And that's the second line. How do I become wealthy versus how do I pay off debts? The timing of paying off my debts is connected to how wealthy I'll be in the future. See, if I got to live forever, then it wouldn't matter how long I paid off my debts. But there's this concept called an endpoint. And there's a point at which we stop saving money. Right? There's a moment, we call it retirement. Right? But it's a moment where I'm stopped saving money. And now that's really interesting because if I stop saving money, the money, I'm not like accumulating wealth anymore. And so one of the things that matters is when did I start contributing money to that accumulation? And it makes, if you hear, one of the good things you hear about when you do a Google search is start right away, right? Start saving right away because of something called compound interest. Well, the factor in compound interest is time. The longer you compound, the wealthier you become. But there's an end point, right? And so if I pay off all my debts first and I don't put money into wealth building, that means I'm shrinking the time, and the time that I get to save money is less. Therefore, there's less money at the end point. And we've talked about this on another call, but the end point, if I cut off the first 2 years, I don't lose the few $1,000s that I've saved. I've lost hundreds of $1,000s of wealth because of that end point, because of compounding interest. So there's a distinction that needs to be made between paying off debts as fast as possible and how does that relate to wealth building? It's not the same conversation. So there's a couple of funny things I want to talk about debt. Most people feel the need to be, no, let's stay on that same slide. Stay on the same slide. So one of the things that I often bring up to people is is it best to pay off your debts? Is it best to pay off your debts when you're poor, or is it best to pay off your debts when you're wealthy? And obviously everyone would go, wealthy. Well, when is it you become wealthy? You don't become wealthy right away. We tend to start creating debt when we're poor and then expect ourselves to pay it off when we're poor. It's really hard to do. Wouldn't it be better to pay off my debts when I'm wealthy? And so that's think about it like that. Another aspect of debt is not a dirty word. I promise you. The wealthiest people in the world have more debt than you could ever imagine. And so think about Manhattan for a second. We see these big giant buildings in Manhattan, and these big giant buildings are owned by people, and they're worth, you can't even imagine how much they're worth. And they all have debt on them. Millions and millions and millions of dollars of mortgage debt is on these buildings. See, but that debt is really attractive because it generates two things. It generates something called cash flow, and then it generates something called an appreciating asset. And so debt in and of itself is not bad. The wealthiest people in the world carry more debt than most people who have small amounts of debt could ever imagine and can handle. So debt is not a bad word. We just have to use it strategically. And that's another thing. We often associate debt with words such as guilt and shame. And when I talk to people about their finances, one of the things they're really shameful of or guilty of is having debts, accumulating debts. There's no shame and guilt in it. Because if you just, in that space of shame and guilt, what we tend to do is we tend to make a lot of bad decisions. And we don't create a strategy, right? A lot of times what I notice people do is they're like, okay, I got this credit card, it's really big. And I'm going to dump, this month I'm putting $500 towards the card. And the next month they do like $100 towards the card. And the next month they do the minimum. And then they're like, oh, I'm in debt again. Let me put in 500. That is not a plan. That's just chaos. And you're not really doing anything. And so you just want to have a plan, and that's where an advisor could come in. And then one more thing about advisor is that debt is not the thing where it's like, oh, just pay it off first. Or you have to mathematically calculate it. That's a big takeaway for anyone on this presentation, is that there is a mathematical equation that says this is how much wealth you have in the future if you do this. This is how much wealth you have in the future if you do that. But see, the point is, when you have a mathematical calculation of looking at two different ways of approaching something, then you can see what the right answer is. Once you know the right answer, then you can make your decision accordingly. That's really important. If that's you always mathematically calculate what the decision is. Now we can go on to the next one. Okay, so I break down debts into two categories: good debts and bad debts. One of the things I say to people in a plan is we want to convert any bad debts into good debts. And then the good debts we can pay off over time. So we'll define good debt as low interest. We hear about typically getting a mortgage is a low interest debt that we can get. Lines of credit against property are low interest type of debts, potentially deductible. Okay, so at the end of the year, when we do our taxes, certain interest we pay is deducted against our taxes. That's really important because if I can deduct that, I get money back essentially, or I pay less in taxes. It's a really powerful position to be in. Yes, manageable within your cash flow. So this comes back to budgeting and cash flow analysis. Yeah, we're going to touch on cash flow analysis and budgeting in a second. But yes, you want it to be manageable. And like I said, so we want to decide when we take on a debt, what is this debt truly for? If it's for something that's going to be valuable to me in the future, then I call that a good debt. If it's not valuable to you, it doesn't serve you in any way, then it's a bad debt. A student loan is probably some of the biggest debts we have, but there's value in a student loan, right? We're investing in ourselves to essentially to earn more money, right? And so if I take on a loan so I can eventually earn more money, it's not a bad debt. And same thing with real estate. Real estate, we take on a mortgage and the real estate itself will appreciate over time. And if we're doing it even from an investment perspective, we could get cash flow out of it. And then those bad debts. Yes. So credit cards in and of themselves aren't bad debts unless you use them incorrectly, right? They could be a powerful tool, but if they're used incorrectly, essentially it turns into chaos. But yeah, they're high interest, right? If you look at most credit cards right now, most people have no idea what they're paying in interest. They really don't. I'll tell you right now, most of the credit cards out there, 20-something%. That's really what it is, 20%. And so it's really hard to pay that thing off over time. Payday loans, there's all different kinds of examples of this. Non-deductible, right? If a credit card is non-deductible, if I have an interest payment, and the other thing, people don't know how much they're paying in interest. They have no idea. I've seen situations with people paying $250, $500 a month in just interest payments. And, $250, $500 a month, if you save that somewhere else into any kind of, retirement generating wealth building product, that's from a 30-year, if you're a 30-year-old, you're talking like millions of dollars of money just disappearing out of your life. So yeah, that's really important. Often we buy things we don't want or don't need. Okay, so this is a big word out there in the world called mindfulness, and it's kind of hard not to bump into this word everywhere we go these days. And mindfulness shows up in our spending, and I am guilty, just like everybody else, of getting that feeling of I have to have this. It's just kind of built into our DNA. And a lot of times being mindful is just kind of taking a breath, thinking about what we're doing here and say, do I really need this? Or do I really need this right now? And oftentimes the answer is no, we don't. We're fine. We're fine without buying a lot of things, I promise you. So, and I was talking about one of the last presentations I gave, I was talking about moving. And I recently had to move from one place to another, me and my family. And you want to talk about the garbage I threw out of all the stuff that I just basically said, I need this. And now I'm just throwing it out, completely useless. The amount of waste is just unbelievable, what we buy and don't really need. So there's that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, behaviors to avoid. Yes, we have gotten into a society of buying things with money we don't have. And it's kind of, there's no one to blame, But the system that we're operating in from a technological perspective is just, it's like dangling the chocolate in front of you. It's dangling the carrot, right? I mean, the ease at which we can buy things is just unprecedented. And so it gets you in that mindset of, oh, I can deal with this later, right? I can handle this later. And it's behavior, right? We say to ourselves, I got this, right? I could pay this off over time. And then we don't, and we find ourselves with this debt that just, it came out of nowhere. I was talking to someone the other day. It's kind of funny. Like, often this happens a lot when we go to restaurants. Nothing against restaurants. You have a couple glasses of wine. Next thing you know, you're like, I got this, Bill. It's like, and you just don't even look at anything. It's like, this is just kind of, and it's just easy. You just hand the card or press the button and we buy things. So we have to really look at like our behavior, our spending pattern. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is, we're starting to get into the concept of cash flow and budgeting. What I say to people about saving is that we do it backwards. Most people, what we do is we go, all right, I'm going to pay my rent or my mortgage. I'm going to eat because I have to. I got a couple insurances I got to pay for, like my home insurance or my health insurance. And then what I'll do, I got a car, everybody, whatever it is that I got to, take the subway. And then we go, what's left over, I'm going to save. And that is incorrect. It's backwards. We set aside first, before we buy the house, before we rent the apartment, before we do anything, we set aside, we say in my world, 15% of our gross income, right? So I'm going to set aside money for wealth building. Okay. Then I funnel in how much money is my rent? How much of a house can I buy? Which car should I get? How do I pay for the car? And then finally from there, we get down to zero, but we've already handled everything else. So that to me is, first of all, we got to do things in the right order. Okay, now buying things. Again, we were talking about behavior before. The behavior is I'll pay for it now and deal with it later. Now, so what you're supposed to do is set aside money for wealth building, pay your mortgage or your rent, eat, all right, pay your insurances, your car. Then what's left over, you're going to analyze this amount of money and go, okay, I'm going to set this aside until I have enough money to buy that thing. That's the way to do it. And so it's like you reward yourself for doing good behavior. That's, to me, the most logical way of doing things. It's really hard to do in this day because, again, the ease of access to these tools that we have. So yeah, next slide. Okay, so there are strategies to paying off debts. There's many of them. None of them are, you don't have to do one over the other. So it's just what works best for you. I tend to like the smallest. I just conceptually, like, it makes a lot of sense to me that if I have a bunch of different debts in my life, right? Let's say I have 3 credit cards that have balances. Well, they all have the same balance, right? One will have $500, the other will have, $2,000. The other one's got a big one, it's $5,000. And what a lot of people say is one way to do this is pay off the smallest balance first. And what this does is really interesting. So I pay off the smallest balance first because I get a win right away. And as the animals that we are, we love to get a win. And we get the win. And now it's like, oh my God, I did something good for myself. And you get inspired to do it again. And what happens is, so I pay off the one debt. Now that minimum payment I was paying before, I get that back into my life now. And so now I have the minimum payment back, the money I was paying towards it, that goes to the next card, then the next lowest balance. And the next lowest balance, I keep doing that over and over again, get that win. And now I got another win. And then finally the last one, and it just kind of unfolds from there. There's a lot of names for it. But to me, that makes a little sense because it gets you inspired. It's actually not the most technically financially efficient way of doing it, because what's happening is you're still paying high interest, right? So the way to deal with that one is a different strategy. And so the highest interest rate first, because the one that's got the highest interest rate is the one generating the most money out the door, right? We're losing that money to the bank, so to speak. And so the most efficient way to do this is you pick the one with the highest interest, pay that one off. And it's usually, typically it's kind of interesting. Your biggest balance is always the one with the highest interest for some reason. So, and so that's a way to do it most efficiently, but it'll take you much longer to pay off that balance over time. And so, yeah, you don't get the win right away, but it is a little bit more strategic from a financial perspective. But again, like it says there, it doesn't matter. Just pick your strategy and go with it. That's appropriate. So moving on from there. Okay. Some basic things that you want to know about debt. First of all, having a plan before is, before you get yourself in trouble, let's not get there. And you get yourself in trouble. So one of the things you want to have is a very beautiful, large emergency fund. And I'm a big fan of large emergency funds. I talk about this a lot in my planning with my clients. I talk a lot about having large cash positions, large checking and savings accounts, or whatever SIP tool that you use. They all work. That's really important. Again, because when you have a lot of money in these emergency funds, you can make the decision to take a big chunk and pay off the debt real quick. That could be a good strategy for you. Next is college. Okay, so one of the things that we talk about a lot about in society right now is these student loans. Everything's about these student loans. And what people don't understand about a student loan is that even wealthy people, wealthy families get scholarship money for their children. People don't know this. Most people think, oh, you have to be poor in order to get money from the institution, the college, the university. That is not true. College planning is a real thing, and it's a real good strategy. Institutions set aside money every year to give away to attract the best students to their school. That is true. And they give it to whoever deserves it from their perspective. Every school is different. Every school sets aside money based on so what you want to do is you want to align the student with the best college that gives away the most money. That's planning for college. Most people go, I'm just going to go to the school that I want. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's an outcome to that decision. And what you really want to do is you want to plan for the college that's going to give you the most money. And I've seen presentations on this. I've seen all kinds of people are like experts at this. And when you see how much money these universities give to even wealthy people, you would be astonished. Full rides. It's amazing. So and there's people that do this for a living. Some financial planners are really good at this as well. So so there's that. Save for large expenses like mortgage, down payment, car, correct? Yes, okay. So a lot of people get into debt because they don't have the insurance they should have had in the first place. And I've seen so many people have these like giant medical debts, right? Because there was just this moment in time in their lives, they were in between jobs or something, or they didn't get the COBRA and didn't pay for the COBRA. And then they end up, unfortunate events happen. So you got to be careful. You don't, I had a client tell me the other day that the apartment next to them caught on fire. Their apartment didn't catch on fire. And what happened was the sprinklers turned on and they didn't have the renter's insurance that only cost $20. And now you're starting to see a situation where that could happen. So insurances are important. And then setting aside money for wealth building. So one of the things you can do in planning is you can save up money into some sort of unique wealth building tool like the stock market or bond market. And then as time goes on, you can use the winnings to pay off the debts in the future. Next slide. Okay, yeah, so like I said before, fix the problems before it happens. One of the things people don't know is they don't know how much money they spend. They don't. They have no idea. And when you sit down and ask somebody, so how much do you spend on food? How much do you spend on this, that, and the other thing? And you get these numbers. And I'm like, oh, you have plenty of money to save every month. And then I take them and I put them in one of my software programs. And there's many out there. You don't have to use mine. But there's many software programs that will connect your bank account to the program. And the bank account and the credit card sends the data to you to see where you're spending your money. And when they see what they actually spend and it tallies everything up, it puts it into a category for you. So you know how much you spend in restaurants, you know how you spend at the gym, you know how much money you spend in rent, and you see, you go, oh my God, that's how much money I'm spending every month on that. And when they see that, it's like, it changes everything. Like, oh, I really have to tone this down a little bit. Like Ubers or taxis. I mean, $500,000 a month on Ubers and taxis. That's big money to spend, and people just don't know this. So it's really helpful to have technology is awesome, right? It gives us the tools we need to solve the problems that we have. And then the advisor concept. Yeah, I mean, having another set of eyeballs and an objective set of eyeballs on what you're doing is really helpful. And like I said, you got to use a calculator. Once you have a calculator show you the numbers, it makes decision-making a lot easier. And yeah, that's it.
All right, we have some questions that came in here. And so I'd like to go ahead and should be that Gia here or JR. When you talked about mindfulness earlier, can you explain a little bit more about that concept, what that means as it applies to your financial future, your financial planning?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that comes up for me with mindfulness. Mindfulness, we tend to associate with meditation, right? That's where it starts, where we generally get that idea. And one of the things about meditation that spoke to me when I started learning about meditation is this concept of just being whole and blissful and wonderful right there, sitting there, closing my eyes, doing nothing but breathing, right? And everything's fine. And it's kind of the same thing with money, right? Like when we go out and buy things, we feel like we're using it as a tool to satisfy this desire. And it does that, but do you need that? I find often that you don't. And the things that we waste money on, they're nonsensical and we don't need them. So it's bringing attention, right? And isn't that meditation mindfulness? Is bringing attention to what's really going on here. And quite often we don't do that. We just act on instinct. And that's just a human condition. We're animals. So that's what we do. It's part of our nature. So there's that aspect to it. Another aspect of mindfulness is like sort of these negative emotions we put towards debt, like shame and like frustration. I don't believe that's where you want to be when you approach managing debt, because there's no power there. And I want to be happy and inspired. Even if I'm in a lot of debt, I want to be happy and inspired when I approach it. So that to me is a mindfulness conversation. And then the other thing is strategy. So one of the strategies I offer my clients is, okay, checking account or a savings account. You can go to any bank and get a savings account. Or you could set up a savings account that I can see, right? Because I have those kinds of tools and I have no control over it. It's just, I can see it. And so what I tell the person is, do you need to set up a savings account that I can see so that when you go and like take money out to go buy the nonsense you're going to buy, JR is going to know about it. And like people like love that they're like, oh, I gotta like, he's going to know that I moved money over so I could buy this stupid thing. And like, it like helps us. So like you set up these
accountability factor.
Accountability. Yeah.
Yeah. And almost all advisors can do that. So you can ask your advisor if they can set an account for you that you can even, I know that there's other types of accounts where you cannot even be able to access it. Is that correct? You can only access it through an advisor.
Yeah, of course. You have to like, hey, I need money. It's like, oh. It's like, oh, JR is going to know.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about, is there like some guidelines as to how much consumer debt is too much or how much mortgage debt, if there's some guidelines there?
Yeah, there are guidelines. So if you go to a mortgage rep, they can get you approved to a mortgage on a debt to income ratio of like 45-50%. Okay, I don't know if you know what that means, but essentially it's, you have an income, right? Let's say it's, $10,000 per whatever per month, and round numbers, how much can I spend per month on the mortgage? Well, a debt to income ratio is what's the debt to the, and I said 50%, right? So that's $5,000 a month you could spend, you can get approved. Okay. That's insane. Right? Because you're going to give away 30-40% to the government anyway, depending upon who you are, where you live, and how much money you make, right? So that leaves you with how much money left over every month? Not much. And there's no saving being able to be happening, right? So we got to be careful of what we can get, right? Because the institutions, they want you to do that, right? Because they make money off of it. So you got to be careful. I was told by a mentor, no more than 25% for your mortgage. That makes a little bit of sense to me. So it still gives you room to save. It gives you room to budget. It gives you room to get the home. So to me, that's a good rule of thumb, and less is better. And I think it's the same thing with, I think it was 20% I've heard, or 10% of your money. Well, it should be with like bad debts. Don't let it get there. That's you're getting in dangerous territory. So yeah, I mean that's general. I mean credit cards. I want to talk about credit cards.
Okay, go ahead.
Because the credit card is designed to be paid off in full every month. I don't know if anybody knows this. The truth is paid off in full every month. You spend what you generate. That's it. If you spend more than what you are capable of, it's a losing proposition. You're just losing money. So pay off in full every month. That's the deal.
Can you talk a little bit about, here's a question about, what about car loans versus car leases?
I love this question. Okay. So there's a lot of, okay, so cars are kind of funky. So there's the not efficient way, and then there's the really efficient way. So let's do the efficient way. The efficient way of buying a car is to purchase it yourself. Okay, you purchase it yourself, you put your down payment on. Most institutions will offer you a 5-year loan to 7-year loan. You pay the thing off, you pay your interest, you pay your monthly payment. Now, you have taken 5 to 7 years to pay this thing off. Cars don't last 5 to 7 years. They last 15 years. They can if you take care of it. Now think about that. That means for the next, if it's a 15 years, that means I have another 7 years left, okay, of no payments. So I have 7 years of no payments and I'm driving a car. See, we need the car. The car is, you can't it's hard to live without a car. So, but you have 7 years of payments, right? The car, depreciates over time. You can probably get a few bucks for it, take those few bucks, make that as your next down payment and start all over again. And all those 7 years, the money you put towards a car, where could you put that? Your wealth building, right? Okay, that's efficiency. Requires dedication, and even better, what you want to do with the car is you don't want to buy brand new, typically. because we all know that story, like it comes off the lot, loses $10,000 in 30 seconds, right? So what you want to do with a car is you want to, unfortunately, this is kind of rude, but you want to get a car off of the bad behavior of somebody else out in the world, right? I mean, let's face it, there's somebody out there who went to Vegas, they gambled their car away, right? And now they have this debt, they want out, and they want out real fast. And so you could get a $50,000 car for $30,000 or $25,000, right? And it's used 6 months or it's used a year. This thing's going to last 15 years. I pay it off over 5 years. And I mean, that's a really great way of doing it. So buying something of real value at a reduced price. That's a strategy. That's being strategic. Okay. Now that takes effort. It takes work. You have to like research it. I don't have that kind of time. And so I'm inefficient. I lease cars because first of all, the process of me getting a car, I hate it. I don't know if you've ever been in that, like you feel like there's like people attacking you when you go like into a dealership. It's like really bizarre. So I'm like, get me in, get me out. I'm going to lease this thing. I don't have to pay for upkeep. I pay my $300 a month or $400 a month, and I don't have to think about it. But it's a part of my budget, right? It's just cars are necessary forever. We always need them. So I just make it a part of my budget. I deal with leases. That's fine. But it's not the most efficient use of my money, but I'm okay with it because I'm still able to save. I'm still able to put away my 15% and so on. So that's my thought process. Either one works. You just have to pick who you want to be.
That's interesting to say, like, it really depends on kind of your personality, what you want to do, and what fits in your cash flow and budget. And I want to remind people that JR did a cash flow webinar with us a while back, and that recording's available on the website. So I have one more question on here, and this is a kind of an interesting one. Said while you were talking about mindfulness about your finances, it reminds me of minimalism. Do you have any thoughts on minimalism when it comes to finances or like managing your life?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I would agree that minimalism is, I'm an advisor, right? So I want you to become wealthy. So minimalism works. So there's a book called The Millionaire Next Door. And it's quasi-famous, like it's pretty famous. And I haven't read it in a long time, so I might be misquoting. But generally what they found was, who are the millionaires of the United States? What are they made of? Like, where did they come from? And most of us would go, well, wealth was passed down to them over time. And, that's who the wealthy are. No, not true. The wealthy, the millionaires of our society have similar characteristics, the majority of them. And it was like 70, 80% of millionaires are this character. They only make $100,000 to $200,000 a year. Dude, when I heard that, it blew my mind. Okay, so they're not these like making $1 million a year people, $100,000 to $200,000 a year. If they're married, they stayed married their whole life. So no divorce, right? No giving away half of my money. Minimalist way of life. No Mercedes. They were epic savers, right? They stuck to 15, 20% of their wealth was put into investments over time. And yeah, they lived below their means. They did not have fancy shoes or fancy clothes. Minimalist. That is our society. Most of the millionaires, you will find out, if you did an analysis, which this author did, lived a minimalist lifestyle, and really interesting book. And so, yeah, every day my life, when I approach my mindfulness, is to get myself more and more closer to a minimalist way of, as I'm getting older, right? I'm not a kid anymore. So, and I have kids. So like you start to see like, the waste and stuff. It's unnecessary. And, so it's kind of interesting how all the questions around mindfulness. It's such a great subject. And when we start, and that's, I talk a lot about that with my clients is we bring mindfulness into money now. I mean, that's the new way of planning. And so, yeah, I love that.
Well, thank you so much. Great questions, everyone. And if we didn't get to one of your questions, go ahead and leave your phone number in the chat. We'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. On behalf of Advice Chaser, thank you so much, JR, for being here. We're appreciative to the organizations that made this possible. And those of you who are attending, look for a replay soon in your email with a replay of this event. You're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. And once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.